In 1908, you could mail a check and receive in return a whole house. Not a dollhouse, but a real two-story mansion made of 30,000 parts arriving in a boxcar. In the early 20th century, Sears wasn't just a store. 1% of the entire US GDP passed through their catalog. That's more than Amazon and Walmart combined today. They were called the Consumer's Bible. The Sears catalog lay in every home next to the Holy Scripture. And to rule their empire, they built the tallest building in the world, the Sears Tower. They knew absolutely everything about an American's life, from his shoe size to the color of the shingles on his roof. But in October 2018, the giant collapsed. An empire that survived 2 world wars was destroyed by its own leadership. The cruelest irony, in 1993, they closed their catalog, deeming mail-order trade obsolete. Exactly 1 year before Jeff Bezos launched Amazon using that exact same model. They held the future in their hands but threw it in the trash. This isn't just a story about a store bankruptcy. This is a story about how corporate arrogance and the cold, mathematical greed of hedge funds devoured the company that taught America how to shop. Part 1. Origins, Watches, and the Railroad. To understand the full scale of this catastrophe, we need to go back to where it all started. Not to the gleaming skyscrapers of Chicago, but to a dusty, wind-blown train station in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, 1886. America is a patchwork quilt of isolated farms and small towns. The life of an ordinary farmer was hard, not only because of the weather. It was hard because of the economy. The farmer was a hostage. He couldn't get in a car and drive to a supermarket. There were no cars, no roads. He was forced to buy everything, from a plow to buttons, at the local general store. The owner of such a store was a local czar. He knew the farmer had no choice and marked up prices godlessly. A rake that cost 50 cents at the factory sold for $2. It was the tyranny of distance. And then Richard Sears enters the scene. He was only 23. He worked as an agent at North Redwood Station. His job was boring, receiving telegrams, loading crates. But one day, an event happened that changed the history of capitalism. A package arrived at the station from a Chicago jeweler, a box of gold-plated pocket watches. The local recipient refused to pay for them. By the rules, Sears should have sent them back. But he was a guy with an entrepreneurial streak. He thought, why send them back if I can sell them here? He bought the watches himself. And then he started sending telegrams to other agents along the rail line. Have excellent watches. We'll sell cheap. Railroad men needed accurate watches. Sears sold the whole batch in a couple of weeks, making more on it than the station paid him in 6 months. At that moment, a switch flipped in the young agent's head. He saw an equation no one else saw. On one side, manufacturers in cities ready to sell cheap. On the other, farmers in villages ready to buy. Between them, greedy middlemen. If I cut out the middleman, Sears thought, and use the railroad and telegraph as a bridge, I will become king. In 1893, he moves to Chicago and finds a partner, Alva Roebuck. It was a classic duo, like Jobs and Wozniak. Richard Sears was a genius salesman, charismatic, loud, capable of selling ice to Eskimos. He wrote ad copy so compelling people wept with desire to buy the product. Alva Roebuck was a quiet, modest watchmaker. He made sure the mechanisms worked, orders didn't get lost, and the books balanced. Together they created a concept that was 100 years ahead of its time, direct to consumer. But they faced a wall of distrust. Imagine yourself as a farmer in Iowa in 1890. Scammers are everywhere. Traveling salesmen sell snake oil that cures nothing. Newspapers print fake ads. The principle of the era was caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. If you got scammed, it's your fault. And here some Mr. Sears from distant Chicago asks you to send him your hard-earned money in an envelope, promising to send goods you haven't even held in your hands. It seemed like madness. Richard Sears realized to break down this wall, he needed to do something radical. And he came up with a phrase that became the foundation of American commerce: satisfaction guaranteed, or your money back. Today we are used to returns, but back then it sounded like a revolution. It sounded like a religious revelation. Sears said, "I take all the risk. You risk nothing. If you don't like the color of the buttons, send them back, and I will return every cent." It worked like magic, farmers believed. At first timidly, then in an avalanche. Sacks of letters stuffed with crumpled dollar bills and coins began arriving at the Chicago station. People voted with their dollars for trust. Part 2. The Ascent, the Wish Book. The engine of this new empire was the catalog, the legendary Big Book. At first, it was a thin brochure with watches, but Richard Sears was unstoppable. He added new items every month. Very quickly, the catalog grew to 500 pages, printed in small type on thin newsprint. It had everything, absolutely everything a person might need from birth to death. On one page, violin strings. On the next, veterinary instruments for castrating bulls. Further on, fashionable hats from Paris. Then, granite tombstones, guns, Bibles, cough medicine, cream separators, baby carriages, chocolate, bricks. For isolated rural families, cut off from the world by snow and mud, the arrival of the new Sears catalog was the event of the year. It was awaited more than Christmas. It was called the Wish Book. Children learned to read from toy descriptions. Women flipped through pages with dresses before bed by the light of a kerosene lamp, dreaming of a life they didn't yet have. Men planned the budget for the year, choosing tools. Even when the catalog became outdated, it wasn't thrown away. It was used as toilet paper in outhouses. Sears literally entered the flesh and blood of the nation. But to process this monstrous flow of orders, logistics were needed the likes of which the world had never seen. In 1906, Sears opens a new distribution center in Chicago, the Homan Square Complex. It was an industrial wonder of the world, 300,000 square meters of space. Henry Ford personally came there for a tour. He walked through the workshops, watched, took notes, and later admitted that it was the Sears system that inspired him to create the automotive assembly line. The system worked like a Swiss watch. In the morning, sacks of letters were dumped onto tables. Clerks opened envelopes, counted money, and wrote out invoices. Each order was assigned a precise time when it had to be assembled. Orders flew through the building in pneumatic tubes, whistling through the air like bullets. Thousands of runners worked in the huge warehouse. They grabbed goods from shelves and threw them into spiral chutes. Gravity did half the work. All streams converged in the packing department. The packer had exactly as much time to assemble the package into a box as it took for the next empty box to arrive on the belt. They shipped 100,000 orders a day. Without computers, without barcode scanners, without robots. Only on paper, pneumatic tubes, and rigid human discipline. It was Amazon version 1.0, running on Steam. The pinnacle of their audacity became Sears Modern Homes. From 1908 to 1940, the company sold over 70,000 houses by mail. It was the quintessence of the American dream, packed in a box. A man chose a house in the catalog. For example, the Magnolia model, a luxurious mansion with columns for $6,000. He sent a check. A few weeks later, 2 boxcars arrived at the nearest train station. The doors opened, and there lay everything. 30,000 parts. Boards, already cut to size. The innovative balloon frame system, requiring no complex carpentry skills. 27,000 shingles for the roof. 750 pounds of nails. Cans of paint and varnish. A bathtub. A toilet. Wires. Light bulbs. And a leather-bound instruction manual. Step 1. Take beam number 14. A man with a couple of friends and neighbors could assemble this house in one summer. These houses stand to this day. From Illinois to Florida, realtors hunt for them today because they are made of the best wood you can't find anymore. century-old pines and oaks. Sears didn't just sell lumber, it sold dignity. It gave the common man the opportunity to live in a house worthy of a banker. Part 3. Greatness, General Wood and the Suburbs. In the 1920s, a man took the helm who changed the company's DNA. General Robert Wood. He was a military logistician, a man who helped build the Panama Canal. He knew how to look at maps and see what others didn't. Wood studied the 1920 census and realized, America is changing. The era of farmers is ending. The era of cities is beginning. People are getting cars. Before, the buyer sat on the farm and waited for the mailman. Now he became mobile. He could drive anywhere. Wood performed a genius pivot. He told the board of directors, the catalog isn't enough. We need stores, but not like everyone else's. Traditional department stores of that time, Macy's, Marshall Field's, were built in cramped city centers. Land was expensive there, streets narrow, and there was nowhere to park. Wood said, no, we will go where our customer lives. We will go to the fields. He started building Sears stores on the outskirts of cities in the new suburbs. And most importantly, he surrounded them with giant, free parking lots. He bet on the automobile. And he won. Thus were born modern shopping centers, malls. Sears became the anchor tenant of every mall in America. The rule for developers for the next 50 years became simple. First agree with Sears. If they sign on, the bank will give money for construction. If not, there will be no construction. Sears guaranteed traffic. On Saturday, the whole family piled into their Chevrolet and drove to Sears. Dad went to the tool department to touch saws. Mom to the clothing department. Kids to look at toys. There you could fix the car at the Sears Auto Center, buy Allstate insurance, order glasses, and have lunch. They created their own brands that became icons. Craftsman tools. They gave a lifetime warranty on them. No receipt, no questions asked. If your wrench broke after 30 years, you brought the pieces to any Sears store. The clerk didn't ask how you broke it. He silently, with a smile, gave you a new, shiny wrench. This created loyalty, bordering on fanaticism. Men passed these tools down to their sons as family heirlooms. Kenmore appliances. In the 70s, every second home in the U.S. had a Kenmore washing machine or refrigerator. Die-hard batteries. Sears was everywhere. In the 70s, they launched the Sears card, and then the Global Discover system. By 1980, every third adult American had their card in their wallet. It boggles the modern mind. They were Amazon, Delivery, Visa, Finance, Walmart, Prices, and Home Depot, Tools, all in one. In the early 70s, 1% of the entire U.S. gross domestic product passed through Sears cash registers. It wasn't a company, it was economic gravity. Part 4. Signals of change, blindness of the giant. But in the 80s, something broke. The mechanism that seemed eternal began to rust from the inside. Sears lost focus. Company management moved into the new Sears Tower, 110 floors above the ground. From such a height, people on the sidewalk are no longer visible. Directors decided that selling shirts, drills, and tires was too boring. It was the old economy. They wanted to become a financial conglomerate. They wanted to play with the big boys from Wall Street. A mad shopping spree began. Sears buys brokerage firm Dean Witter Reynolds. Sears buys luxury real estate agent Coldwell Banker. The slogan of that time sounded like a joke. Stocks and socks. They sincerely believed a person would come into the store to buy a pair of socks, and while passing the register, buy a bundle of IBM stock or a house in California. It was an illusion. Directors in Chicago were more interested in derivative quotes than what was happening on the sales floor. The stores were left unsupervised. While the giant looked at the sky, someone knocked from below. Sam Walton, a guy from Arkansas with his Walmart, started aggressively eating up the market from the bottom. He offered lower prices and faster logistics. And from the flanks pressed category killers. Home Depot took tools. Best Buy took electronics. Gap took clothing. Sears ended up in the middle. It ceased to be the best at anything. It became a store for everything and nothing. And then, in 1993, they made the most fatal, stupidest mistake in the history of world business. Managers looked at their legendary catalog. In recent years, it had been losing money. Printing was expensive, paper was getting pricier, delivery was becoming harder, and they decided, this is the past. The future is in malls. They closed the catalog. They fired 50,000 people. They dismantled and disbanded a unique logistics network, warehouses, sorting centers, everything that was perfectly suited for the coming internet era. This happened exactly 1 year before Jeff Bezos sold his first book. Jeff Bezos invented nothing new. He simply moved the Sears catalog into an internet browser. Sears voluntarily, with its own hands, gave the keys to the future to the new king. If they had kept the catalog and simply digitized its database, today, Amazon would be called Sears.com. They had everything: goods, warehouses, trust. Only vision was missing. Part 5. The Fall, Eddie Lampert, and Financial Cannibalism. In the early 2000s, the company was wounded but still alive. It had billions in assets, the best real estate in the country, and loyal brands. It could have been saved. A visionary retailer was needed who would breathe new life into the stores. Instead of a visionary, a vulture arrived. In 2005, Eddie Lampert seized control of the company. A hedge fund manager, a financial genius, a man with cold eyes and a calculator instead of a heart. He merged Sears and another dying chain, Kmart, in an $11 billion deal. Wall Street applauded. Businessweek put him on the cover with the headline, "The Next Warren Buffett." But Lampert was a financier, not a merchant. He hated stores. He considered retail a dirty, low-margin business. He looked at Sears not as a business selling goods to people. He looked at it as a giant portfolio of undervalued real estate. Lampert stopped investing in stores. Completely. While Walmart and Target spent billions on updating displays, new registers, bright lights, and mobile apps, time stood still in Sears stores. Roofs leaked. Tiles fell off. Escalators stood broken for months. Carpets were worn to holes. Registers were from the 90s. Customers walked inside and smelled decay. Instead of repairs, Lampert introduced an insane, toxic management system based on Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. He divided the single company into 30 autonomous divisions. Shoes, appliances, clothing, tools, all became separate mini-companies with their own P&L, profit and loss, budgets. And he forced them to compete with each other. Civil war began. Shoe department managers fought with clothing managers for space in the ad circular. They hid data from each other. They had to pay the IT department for every computer, pay the HR department to hire an employee. It reached absurdity. The appliance department refused to advertise Craftsman tools because they are competitors for the customer's wallet. Instead of fighting Amazon, Sears began devouring itself from the inside, like a snake eating its own tail. To show profit to shareholders on paper, Lampert began selling off the family silver. He sold the legendary Craftsman brand to Stanley Black & Decker for $900 million. He sold the very soul of Sears, the right to a lifetime warranty. Now Craftsman tools can be bought in any hardware store, and Sears ceased to be unique. He spun off the best stores into a separate real estate company, Seritage Growth Properties, and began leasing these buildings back to Sears itself. It was a genius scheme to move money from the left pocket to the right, while the business died of blood loss. The company spent billions on stock buybacks to artificially inflate the price on the exchange instead of buying new merchandise for the shelves. Part 6. The Crash, the Empty Tower. By the 2000s and 10s, Sears stores turned into ghosts. Customers who walked in out of old habit saw a terrifying picture. Huge, echoing halls, dim lighting. Managers were saving on electricity. Clothes lay on the floor because there was no one to pick them up. Shelves were half empty. Suppliers, fearing bankruptcy, refused to ship goods without 100% prepayment. Finding a salesperson was impossible. Staff was cut to a biological minimum. The remaining employees looked depressed and tired. They knew the end was near. Revenue fell every quarter for a decade. It was a slow, agonizing agony. Death by 1,000 cuts. October 15, 2018. The day the music finally stopped. Sears filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Debts exceeded assets by billions of dollars. Eddie Lampert, running the company via video conference from his estate in Florida. He hadn't appeared at the Illinois headquarters for years. Blamed everything on changes in retail, cold weather, and dishonest suppliers. He never once admitted that his strategy of financial cannibalism was flawed. Although all experts, all former employees, all analysts screamed in one voice about the lack of investment. You cannot sell if your store looks like a crime scene. The great liquidation sale was pathetic. People came to the closing stores not to buy. They came to say goodbye to an era. They walked through empty aisles like tourists through the ruins of Pompeii. Signs were taken down. Mannequins were sold for pennies, often missing arms and legs. Shelves were scrapped for metal. But the hardest blow fell on the people. Tens of thousands of Sears retirees. People who gave the company 30 to 40 years of their lives. People who started working there right after high school, believing Sears was forever. They lost their benefits and health insurance. Their pension fund turned out to be empty. Eddie Lampert's financial gains were paid for with the health of simple cashiers, stock clerks, and drivers. Part 7. Conclusion of the story. The story of Sears is perhaps the most massive and instructive corporate tragedy in American history. It is an inoculation against corporate arrogance. They were first. They invented everything. They invented home delivery. They invented the return guarantee. They invented credit cards for the masses. They invented shopping malls. They had everything Amazon prides itself on today. But they allowed the future to be stolen from them because they considered themselves too big to change. They forgot that their business isn't selling goods, but customer convenience. When Amazon became more convenient, brand loyalty evaporated in a day. The example of Eddie Lampert proves that financial engineering cannot replace product strategy. You can manipulate stocks, spin off real estate into REITs, play with derivatives, and optimize taxes all you want. But retail is simple. It's a clean floor, full stock, good lighting, and a salesperson's smile. If your store is dirty, dark, and empty of goods, you are bankrupt. No Wall Street magic will save you. Sears didn't die of old age. It was gutted from the inside, coldly and cynically turning a great legacy into a set of assets for liquidation. The saddest consequence is the loss of trust and memory. The Craftsman brand was a symbol of quality for ages. The slogan, Sears, where America shops, was truth, not advertising. Now America shops on a phone, lying on the couch, pressing the buy in one click button. And on the site of great Sears department stores, where life once bustled, where children sat on Santa's lap, they are now building faceless apartment complexes or warehouses for Amazon. The circle has closed. History devoured its creator, leaving not even a beautiful tombstone.